The piece of wood I have right here is what I'm going to use for making the biggest, most demanding, and in my opinion the best wood carving project I've ever made. And apart from a couple tiny surface finishes, everything is going to be hand carved. Previously I've found starting big projects like this a little bit intimidating, since with a very limited set of hand tools, the initial stages of removing large amounts of wood is often very strenuous. However, using this combination of sawing and splitting the wood to create what are essentially big stop cuts made creating the initial rough shape a lot easier and also quite fun. My wood of choice is yet again European aspen, which is quite soft and therefore has a big effect on the ease of this carving process. Even after the initial splitting, stop cuts remain as one of the most significant parts of this project. And using the handsaw for the first half of these big stop cuts makes the process much more efficient. What I'm doing here might seem a little bit sketchy, but in my opinion, cuts like these with a thin, controllable handsaw are no more dangerous than most cuts with a knife. Of course, in the ideal situation, the piece of wood would be stably attached to the table and wouldn't need me supporting it with my other hand. However, excessive pressure is what would make this sketchy, and by applying barely any pressure, the handsaw is not going to easily slip. And even if it does, it won't go far or with a lot of force. That being said, I still don't recommend this. This method is definitely something that I enjoy a lot. So instead of using detailed outlines of the parrot for carving the proportions, I'm using a bunch of reference images all throughout the project, roughly sketching features on the wood and then carving based on those. As I get to finer and finer details, the process is getting closer to just whittling. But what I also find very enjoyable is this back and forth workflow between different parts of the parrot sculpture. Even just based on keeping things interesting, I found that this workflow happened quite naturally for me during this project, since there were times when working on one part started to feel a little bit boring, and I figured that why not just work on something else for a while. I've talked about this multiple times in my whittling tutorials, but this kind of a back and forth workflow where you're defining all major features at once works great for getting the proportions right. Making one part at a time can easily result in a mismatch and the unnecessary redoing of details. I've been carving a lot of birds recently, but the theme of this project wasn't really determined by the fact that I like birds. Where this started was from the idea that I wanted to test myself a little bit and carve something that would be as big as possible. It just so happens that the biggest piece of wood I had was a pretty long and narrow one, and that already narrows down the options for animal figures quite a lot. Since my very first proper wood carving project, when I was 12 years old, was a parrot, I figured it would be nice to make a similar project for comparison. The funny thing is that until last year, the very first parrot carving of mine also remained the only proper wood carving project I had made from start to finish. I think this comparison and the story behind it will be a topic for another video. This piece of wood right here is juniper, and that is what I'm going to use for the feet of this macaw. It is a much harder and more durable wood compared to the aspen I'm using for the rest of the body, and that is precisely why it is good for the thin feet. I don't know about the rest of the northern parts of the world, but here in Finland, especially in Lapland, juniper is used a lot for small wood carving projects, such as jewelry, small ornaments, and butter knives. The use of juniper is so deeply rooted in the culture of the Finnish Lapland that most of the souvenir shops up there in the north are filled with all kinds of beautiful items carved out of it. What's even nicer is that juniper preserves very well for a long time after it's dead and fallen from its original growing spot. This piece had been dead and fallen for months before I picked it up, yet it's as good as new. I kind of wanted to carve this entire sculpture by hand, but I just couldn't figure out a way to make these tight places smooth. So I prioritized the result over my preferred choice of methods. If any of you have any suggestions on how this could have been done with hand tools, please let me know in the comments. Currently, I enjoy hand carving a lot more than power carving because it just feels very peaceful, and I also find the variation in the techniques interesting and fun. Hand carving is also so much cleaner, and since I don't have a workshop, it makes a big difference. Cleaning wood chips off the table and the floor is very manageable, whereas the dust from a lot of power carving would cause some serious problems. I was considering a different approach at first, but ended up choosing this rough and natural feel for the base or the stand of the sculpture. So I was planning on stabilizing this base by gluing this tiny branch into a position that would support the sculpture, but it turns out no matter where I put it, there's just too much weight on the top. It would be able to stand this way on its own, but it's very unstable. That is why I'm making a little added piece. It's gonna be something like this. Since I wasn't able to glue this small branch back into position any other way, I had no option but to do this. The next time I'll be making something bigger like this, I think I'll go for a more classy, traditional, less realistic wood finish, but this time I really wanted to use acrylic paint to get those bright colors of a red and green macaw.